Economic Democracy by Major C.H. Douglas. The essential feature of a sound democracy is not at all that the will of the majority shall prevail. That is simply mob law. But it is that the welfare of the individual shall be the primary consideration of the community. We put it forward as an article of personal faith that the welfare of the community cannot possibly involve injustice to the individual, and that it is the erection of a system of thought, action, and politics in the form of an impersonal state to be used for personal or class interests, which has made the conflict between the state and the individual the feature of the present crisis. Just so long as the thing called the state is determined to march to its ends over the rebellious individuality of even the smallest section of its components, just so long is its policy unsound. Economic Democracy by Major C.H. Douglas. Chapter 1. There has been a very strong tendency, fortunately not now so strong as it was, to regard fidelity to one set of opinions as being something of which to be proud, and consistency in the superficial sense as a test of character. The Scottish political constituent, who always voted for a Liberal because he was too conservative to change, has his counterpart in every sphere of human activity, and most particularly so in that of economics, where the tracing back to first principles of the dogmas used for everyday purposes requires, in addition to some little aptitude in research, a laborious effort of thought and logic, very foreign to our normal methods. It thus comes about that modification in the creed of the orthodox is both difficult and conducive to exasperation, since because the form is commonly mistaken for the substance, it is not clearly seen why a statement, which has embodied a sound principle, may in course of time become a dangerous hindrance to progress. Of such a character are many of our habits of thought and speech today, because from the commercial policy of the 19th century has quite clearly sprung great advance in the domain of science and the mastery of material nature. The commercialist, quite honestly in many cases, would have us turn the land into a counting house and drain the sea to make a factory. On the other hand, the social reformer, obsessed, as well he might be, with the poverty and degradation which shoulder the very doors of the rich, is apt to turn his eyes back to the days antecedent to the Industrial Revolution. Note or assume that the conditions he deplores did not exist then, at any rate, in so desperate a degree, and condemn all business as abominable. At various well-defined epochs in the history of civilization, there has occurred such a clash of apparently irreconcilable ideas as has at this time most definitely come upon us. Now, as then, from every quarter comes the unmistakable signs of crumbling institutions and discredited formulae, while the wide-spread nature of the general unrest, together with the immense range of pretext alleged for it, is a clear indication that a general rearrangement is imminent. As a result of the conditions produced by the European war, the play of forces, usually only visible to expert observers, has become apparent to many who previously regarded none of these things. The very efforts made to conceal the existence of springs of action other than those publicly admitted has riveted the attention of an awakened proletariat as no amount of positive propaganda would have done. A more or less conscious effort to refer the results of the working of the social and political system to the bar of individual requirement has, on the whole, quite definitely resulted in a verdict for the prosecution, and there is little doubt that the sentence will be pronounced and enforced. Before proceeding to the consideration of the remedies proposed, it may be well to emphasize the more salient features of the indictment, and in doing this, it is of the first consequence to make very sure of the code against which the alleged offences have been committed. And here we are driven right back to first principles, to an attempt to define the purposes, conscious or unconscious, which govern humanity in its ceaseless struggle with environment. To cover the whole of the ground is, of course, impossible. The infinite combinations into which the drive of evolution can assemble the will, emotions and desires are probably outside the scope of any form of words not too symbolical for everyday use. But of the many attempts which have been made, it is quite possible that the definition embodied in the majestic words of the American Declaration of Independence, the inalienable right of man to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is still unexcelled, although the promise of its birth is yet far from complete justification. And if words mean anything at all, these words are an assertion of the supremacy of the individual considered collectively over any external interest. Now, what does this mean? First of all, it does not mean anarchy, nor does it mean exactly what is commonly called individualism, which generally resolves itself into a claim to force the individuality of others to subordinate itself to the will to power of the self-styled individualist. And most emphatically, it does not mean collectivism in any of the forms made familiar to us by the Fabians and others. It is suggested that the primary requisite is to obtain, in the readjustment of the economic and political structure, such control of initiative that by its exercise every individual can avail himself of the benefits of science and mechanism, that by their aid he is placed in such a position of advantage that in common with his fellows he can choose, with increasing freedom and complete independence, whether he will or will not assist in any project which may be placed before him. The basis of independence of this character is most definitely economic. It is simply hypocrisy, conscious or unconscious, to discuss freedom of any description which does not secure to the individual that in return for effort exercised as a right, not as a concession, an average economic equivalent of the effort made shall be forthcoming. It seems clear that only by a recognition of this necessity can the foundations of society be so laid that no superstructure built upon them can fail, as the superstructure of capitalist society is most unquestionably failing, because the pyramids which should sustain it are honeycombed with decay. Systems were made for men, and not men for systems. And the interest of man, which is self-development, is above all systems, whether theological, political, or economic.